Welcome to the This Is Not What I Signed Up For podcast. This is a series of podcasts aimed at new managers, supervisors, and team leads, giving you bite-sized takeaways that you can take in a short space of time. Check out the book of the same title on thisisnotwhatisignedupfor.com or over on Amazon. If this sounds like it's for you, then this is the podcast you signed up for. Let's get our feet wet and learn to swim with today's episode. Hello and welcome to This Is Not What I Signed Up For, the podcast for new managers in the space, teaching you how to swim so you don't sink. And I'm very excited today to have Pam Ross with me. And Pam believes that we spend far too much time at work for it to suck, and that everyone has the power to make work awesome. Pam spent 15 years in HR and operations leadership in the corporate world and quit her job with a mission to improve work life. She brings her experience and her training in resilience, the science of happiness, systems coaching, and self-managed work to her clients to build more engaged and innovative workplaces where people are free to do their best work. And I think that's what we all really want to do. Pam, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Great. I can't wait to dive into our conversation today. It's going to be a good one. Before I get into what our topic is, one of the things I do with every guest is ask for what is the worst piece of advice you've ever received or the worst mistake you've made in terms of management?
Well, lucky enough, I've made many mistakes.
As have we all.
I continue to make them. I sometimes joke that that's maybe the reason why I started my business, so I can learn and improve all the time. But one that stands out related to today's discussion is I had to fire someone on my team. And I had given them sort of the nice version of feedback over time. And when I fired them, they were shocked. And it was a terrible termination, lots of emotion, lots of anger. And upon reflecting back, when I thought about the feedback I had given them, again, it was that sort of nice feedback, like, it would be great if you did this more. How about trying it this way? And I had never really had a difficult conversation with them and really dug into, why weren't they being successful? Why weren't these little nice tidbits of feedback catching on? And I wasn't clear about what needed to happen or the impact if it didn't. So the worst firing I've ever gone through, and being in HR, I've done a lot since then. But that was the worst one, and I learned a lot about feedback.
I think that's something we all learn. I've got similar as well with just not giving that right feedback, trying to be nice and all of that. But that's a great point as to what we're speaking to today. So today we're going to be speaking about taking the fear out of feedback, which when I saw you message me, Pam, and I saw this topic, I'm like, oh, this is wonderful. I'm adamant about providing feedback and good feedback because of situations like what you just mentioned, where I've also had horrible layoffs and things because I didn't get it right. So let's dive into it. And I think the first thing I want to find out is how does this play out for a new manager who's just in this space? This is not the part necessarily that you first think of when you get into management. But now you're getting into management. It is one of the things, then the realities you're going to have to face. So how does it play out when people react badly to feedback?
Yes. So I mean, just that, Ross, is so interesting because I think a lot of us don't think about what this new job, this promotion to management really means when we take it. We just that's the next natural progression. So we say yes to it and we don't make the conscious choice of what leadership means. But that's a whole other conversation. So how does this play out? So what I've seen is some disregarding of feedback because my manager doesn't know what they're talking about. They just went into telling me all of this stuff and they have no idea what my day-to-day looks like. So I'm just going to disregard it. I've seen the emotional reaction and kind of an anger reaction when feedback's given in a way that's not effective. And like just trust being broken, and people who just don't hear the feedback because it's not given clearly enough. Yeah. And then managers are afraid to do it again. And a lot of times, to be honest, they're afraid before they even get to it because they're feeling the fear of it and the emotion behind the feedback before they get into the conversation. So when you're going into a conversation with emotion or anger or frustration, it's never going to go really that well.
Yeah, that's true. And I know from my feelings when I've gone in not in the right headspace, it's really not gone well.
Yeah.
Uh, so leading from that, what are some of the common mistakes that folks would make in giving the feedback that they're going in for?
Yeah. And again, I'm going to say this with zero judgment because I've made all of these mistakes.
I think we all have. I that's what we're here for with this. I'm very open that I've made mistakes all the way along, and you're going to on our listeners as well. But
So
you learn.
that is from mistakes we learn. So
Yeah.
it's all good. So things I've seen, because of that fear, managers are holding back the feedback. They're waiting too long to give it, or they're waiting for like a formal performance review or something to happen that sparks that they should have a feedback discussion. Some of the things that I've also seen is like the blanket, we call it, an email to the whole team about
Oh,
something one person is doing. Have you seen this?
oh, so many times. So
Oh,
it's something that I have a little soapbox on, and that's probably a different podcast as well.
oh
Um,
my
it's
goodness.
the
Yeah.
so passive aggressive to not actually solving the problem.
Right. So not effective. Like the person who's doing it probably goes, "Oh, I guess everyone's doing this. It wasn't that much of a big deal." The people who aren't doing it know who's doing it. The gossip start, like so many things happen. Just really, really
Yeah.
ineffective. Um, Really general feedback. So I used to have a manager who would always tell me every day, "Great job, you're a rock star," and all of these things. And I mean, it sounds nice when you hear it, but it didn't mean anything. I wasn't
Hmm.
learning anything. I'm like, what part of what I did today was good? I don't know. So, like, general feedback, whether it's positive or negative, isn't really helpful. And then the way I got taught to give feedback was the sandwich method.
Hmm.
And this is where, you start with the positive, you put the meat in the middle, that's the stuff that needs to actually improve, and then you end on a positive. And this can turn out to be that nice feedback that I talked about earlier, where the message gets totally lost. And some people might only focus on that meat and
Hmm.
really, really overemphasize that. I would say that's probably the exception. Most people just hear those positive things and think everything is fine, and you ended on a positive, so it must be good. And if they've had feedback conversation more than once, they know what's coming. It's insincere. So that was the way I got taught to deliver feedback, and over time, I've realized that that is not an effective
I
way
I
either.
feel like we had a very similar upbringing in terms of that because I also got I received the sandwich many times and I gave the sandwich many times before abandoning the sandwich.
Yes, get rid of the sandwich. Totally.
So Pam, with these, and I think you alluded to a few of them and a few ways to address these, but what are some of the key things that people can do to address these mistakes of going in for this feedback?
Yeah. Um, well, so first of all, I think one of the biggest mistakes with all of these is that the focus is on the manager giving the feedback all the time. And there is like a natural threat response that people go into when someone says, like, "Can I give you feedback?" And there is like kind of a threat response we go into that causes these defensive reactions sometimes. So for my first tip is to make it easier for you as a manager. And so feedback shouldn't be this formal thing that, like, oh, we're going to have a feedback conversation. It's a performance review. It's a formal thing. Feedback should be happening all the time, frequent and
Hmm.
frictionless, not formal. So making it part of the everyday, and the intention around feedback is like, even if we got 1% better every day, we're always going to be looking for things we can improve. We're always going to be looking at what we're doing well, and doing that every day, not just at a formal time.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you raised that. That's one of the things I talk about in the book and in the sort of training that I give as well, is that regular feedback makes such a difference. That wait for a performance review every 6 months or something to raise something is terrible for so many reasons. Like, performance review, even in 3 months, you only focus on what's happened in the last 6 weeks, really. And if something bad has happened in 6 weeks, you forget what happened a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, 4 months ago, and
Hmm.
the focus can be in the wrong place. It's just, it's such a bad
Yeah,
approach for that, and it tends to go so badly every single time. I love the frequent feedback
yeah.
mechanism. Where I am currently, we don't really have reviews because we are chatting every day, feedback all the time, and it works so well because everyone understands what's coming, and it's such a relaxed rapport that you get.
Exactly. We have something called a blues and oranges feedback model, where blue is the color of trust and freedom. So these are things that are going well, successes you've had, you're building your trust and autonomy on the team. And then oranges are the color of the roadblock. So challenges, things you want to do differently. And we have a blues and oranges discussion after every workshop. After this podcast, I'll have a one to none because I don't have my team members off this afternoon, but I'll have a one to none and give myself blues and oranges feedback, and like after in every one to one. So it is just something that happens all the time, and it's a natural part of our everyday. So it never feels like, uh-oh, we have to have talk about feedback right now.
Mm,
So yeah, I would say that's the first thing. Frequent, frictionless, not formal. And the next thing is, I mentioned how all of those for those ways of feedback is the manager telling someone what the feedback is. And in today's world, in most jobs, the manager isn't right there standing over you, seeing your everyday inside your brain, understanding why you're making decisions. Managers are not omniscient. We are not all knowing. So, again, this is a way to make your feedback easy. Ask before you tell. So instead of just going right into telling someone what they need to improve, start asking them about what they think they're doing well and what they want to improve on. So every single, even if you've seen a mistake be made or the outcome of something, you don't know how they got there. So rather than telling them how to fix the mistake they made, start by asking, like, tell me how you got to this point so you can figure out what you're solving for. So
mm.
often this is one of the things I think that causes that negative reaction in people. They're like, you have no idea. Like, the reason why I did it this way was X, and you haven't asked me anything. Every situation is different, every person is different. So ask before you tell.
Yeah. And I think that ties into so many different things. Like, you're sparking off ideas in my head now, where we're talking about things like looking at the outcome. And it's something I speak to new managers a lot as well, is where someone doesn't necessarily do something the same way you do,
Hmm.
but they do come to a good outcome. And
Yes.
that's something I think as well, where you've got to just be aware, if you're giving feedback, just because someone didn't follow the same route you followed doesn't necessarily mean that it was a bad route they took to get to it. So
Yeah.
just a little 2 cents that popped into my head there.
And I love that because it's an awesome opportunity. So when you see the outcome come, and you've maybe seen like how they were doing it, a little bit of like gotten some hints as to how they were going along and been a little worried, and then they get this great outcome. I love to ask a question. So we also have a saying, which we have something called FOQs, which stands for focused open questions. And we always say, give at least two fox. Focused open questions. It's not what it sounds like, but we like to play with the language. And so you see a great outcome. I would say, like, tell me about this project that you worked on. What are some things that you found you did really well in that? So
Hmm.
you're going to learn what they were thinking about, what they're proud of, and get a good understanding of like how they're thinking about things and what they see as a good job. And then you can ask, is there anything that you found challenging, or what did you find most challenging? This is an orange question. So that was a blue question. What did you do well? An orange question is, what would you do differently, or what was most challenging about that? And again, you're going to find opportunities to give them some feedback in the places where they need it, instead of just blanketing them with something that they don't need. So always give at least two FOCs, one focused open question that's a blue or a positive, and one focused open question that's an orange or something that they can learn from, so that you can help them develop.
Amazing. And I think getting those two kind of spaces gives you such fuel for ongoing reviews as well, because you can track back to it. Where were you? How's it gone?
Yeah.
Has it improved? So I think that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll notice over time. So this is something we do in every one-to-one as an example. So, and on my team, we don't even have to use the Fox anymore, because we just know blues and oranges. So, and that frequent and frictionless piece goes both ways. So I'm sharing what I think I did well this week, and finding out what my team members think they did well this week. I'm asking them what they saw I did well. I'm giving them some positive blue feedback as well. And we do the same with oranges. Here's what I think I can do, I can improve on. Here's what they think they can improve on, and back and forth. And what I have found is sometimes our blues and oranges are little tiny things, like they're, oh, I should have made this call earlier, because by the time I called, the client had already looked into it, or whatever, right? And that's like a tiny little hiccup. But what we'll find is, because we're documenting them and just in a shared doc, over time, I'm like, oh, there's been like 3 or 4 times where something has, like, a client has thought of something before we did. Now that's becoming a pattern and a theme. What can we do to improve that? That seems like it's a challenge for us. So even when they're really tiny blues or oranges, the theme over time, because becomes something that you can really build on as a strength, or develop as an opportunity.
Well, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Pam, thank you so much for this. I think just in these tidbits, it's such good advice for folks that are going into this. Perhaps you're about to have your first review meeting, and I think this is a great basis to look at going into that. And I think, even if I know a couple of companies actually prescribe how their managers should do feedback sessions, and it gets difficult.
Mm.
Uh, what would you say, perhaps as a closing thought, if you have a closing thought on that? Like, how can you address it if your company prescribes your way of reviewing someone?
Right. So do you mean review it in a formal way, like a performance review?
Yeah, like a performance review where they really mandate this is the approach you must take. I've seen it at a number of companies that this is the structure you must follow, and it's sent down from HR. And
Yeah. And so I have seen that. So one thing I would say is, um, that is the formal piece. You can still be doing the frequent and frictionless piece. So this doesn't even have to have a meeting room. This is like, we're walking away from a meeting we were just in, and in the hallway, we're saying, hey, what do we think we did well in that meeting? What do you think we should do better if we were to do that over again? Or like, we end a Zoom call with a client and we stay on the call for a couple minutes and say, okay, blues and oranges, what did we do well? What can we improve on? That's when I say like frequent and frictionless, it's like not at those formal reviews. Now, as you have those, though, if there is a formal review process, sure, like you might have noticed some themes that you can discuss there. Um, and when you say a certain way, like I've heard things like the SBI method. Have you heard of the SBI method of feedback?
I have.
Yeah.
I haven't heard of it in a while, but it's come up before a couple of times.
Yeah. So that's like, when you give feedback, you must use situation, behavior, impact. And so
Yeah.
maybe that's what your company teaches, right? So situation, behavior, impact. So I can do that as part of my conversation with you, but I'm going to ask you about it first. Before I give you my feedback in the way the company wants me to give my feedback, I can still ask you, what you think you're doing well or what you think you want to improve. So I think you can bring in the conversational element, and then also layer on anything that your company needs, if that makes sense.
Plug it into the approach.
Yeah.
I think that's great. Pam, thank you so much. As we're closing off, tell the listeners a little bit about what you're working on.
Well, we did just actually launch a free micro course on this blues and oranges, which anyone can get into. But really, my focus is just cultivating more open feedback cultures and making work awesome. Doing a lot of leadership workshops and culture design and development with companies. So yeah,
awesome.
What I love.
Fantastic. And folks, if you want to find out more about what Pam is working on, her details are going to be in the show notes. So you can hop over there, check out her links and follow up with her. Pam, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been great. To the listeners, please subscribe. Please give us a listen. If you like this, share it with managers that you may know who need this. And maybe you've got someone who doesn't give particularly good feedback. Perhaps give it over to them as well for a listen. To our listeners, thank you very much for listening to Pam. Thank you so much for joining us today. Till next time, folks, keep swimming. Thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, give our guests a follow and hit the subscribe button for plenty more content like this. I have a book out covering the types of subjects you've just heard about, available on my website, thisisnotwhatisignedup.com, or over on Amazon. While you're at it, sign up for my newsletter to get news about blog posts, e-courses, and new episodes as they're released. If you'd like to get me in to speak to your leadership teams or to coach some of your managers, reach out to me via the website or drop me a line over at LinkedIn. Till next time, keep swimming.